Made the motion and Gordon seconded it.
Yep.
And we were on page 1 we had no problems with. Page 2, Greta had brought to our attention a matter under item number 5. At the last sentence, to establish the district, at least 2 towns need to put the matter to and include the word town public vote. Anything else on page 2? Page 3. Hearing no further corrections then, all those in favor of approving the minutes of June 21, 22, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And Jeff doesn't appear to be with us at this point.
No.
So, anyway, this right now is a time for public comment on any item that members of the audience wish to bring up. And if there's anyone in the room or on remote that wishes to make a public comment, this would be the time.
Don't see anyone online.
No one wishes to make public comment at this time. There'll be lots of time later on for public comment. So next on the agenda is a resolution for our retiring highway foreman, Mark Russell. I haven't seen Mark in a long time, but so let's take up the resolution first, and then we'll have Eric, and introduce Mark, and as well as Bruce. Resolution of the Williston Selectboard. Whereas Mark Russell began work at the Highway Division of the Public Works Department on March 3rd, 1995, and has served as highway foreman since April 30th, 2016. And whereas on July 8th, 2022, Mr. Russell will retire, having served the community of Williston for over 27 years. And whereas Mr. Russell's dedication and leadership to the Highway Division has served the community of Williston extremely well over his career, and he has impacted and mentored dozens of employees with a calm demeanor and assertive voice. And whereas the amount of time Mr. Russell spent coordinating and taking part in winter operations and operational needs of the department at all hours of the day and night, on weekends and on holidays over the course of his career cannot be understated. And whereas Mr. Russell has been a driving force for operational success of the Williston Highway Division and a model of integrity and dedicated public service to the community of Williston. Now therefore be it resolved, the Williston Select Board hereby thanks Mark Russell for his over 27 years of dedicated service to the community and the people of Williston, and wish him the very best in his retirement. Is there a motion?
Move we adopt the resolution thanking Mark Russell for his service to Williston as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So we have passed the motion. Eric, I'll turn it over to you to introduce Mark, who's here tonight, and Bruce.
Sure. Well, thanks, Terry, and thanks for the board. I just want to say Mark is retiring at the end of this week. We hate to see him go. We wish him the very best in his retirement coming up. He's, as the resolution states, he's served the community with immense dedication for over 27 years in Public Works Highway Division. And that's a lot of years and hours plowing and other emergency services to the town for Public Works, many hours managing our staff as road foreman, many hours just dedicated employee to our town. And Mark's one of the best you'll find out there with his dedication in public service, and we just really wish him well in this next chapter here in retirement. So, job well done, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Bruce, want to say any words?
This next chapter is part-time snow plowers. I can't say anything more. You guys have said it. You had it. The resolution nailed it on the head. Mark's a great person to work with. We certainly going to miss him. He's going to be part of a good place. But, don't blame me for wanting to stop doing this stuff.
Thank you so much, Mark, and we'll have this resolution signed by all the select board and get it to you for sure. So thank you so much for your service. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Next, this is a good night because we have lots of good things to do tonight. And this next item is the town clock room dedication. And so I'll read the resolution that we have before us. Whereas the town clock was manufactured by E. Howard Company of Boston, Massachusetts, and it was delivered August 16th, 1899, and installed on August 30th, 1899, in the steeple of the Williston Methodist Church, which is now the Williston Federated Church. And whereas the town clock has run faithfully since 1900, with only minor repairs thanks to the committed stewardship of community members to aid in its operation. And whereas William F. White served as custodian and winder of the town clock from 1997 to 2017. He continued to aid in this operation until his death in November 2020. And whereas Mr. White made an invaluable contribution to the community in his stewardship of the town clock, providing meticulous support and ingenuity to ensure its continued operation, including modifying the mechanical system to engineer a stationary bicycle drive attached to the clock movement, to raise the 1,500-pound strike weight in a stone-filled wooden box in the church steeple. Now therefore be it resolved, the Williston Selectboard hereby names the room that houses the mechanical components of the town clock, the William F. White Town Clock Room, as an ongoing recognition of Mr. White's many years of service to the community of Williston. I've heard the resolution. Is there a motion?
I'll move to adopt the resolution naming the room that houses the mechanical components of the town clock, the William F. White Town Clock Room, as a remembrance and ongoing thanks to Mr. White for his many years of service to the community and stewardship of the town clock.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So tonight we have Ursula White as
Yeah,
well.
I'd like to just thank you very much. We are very honored, and Bill would be so excited. He spent a lot of time in that room. Was really his getaway. I had Pastor Paul go up and check on him once in a while because I was worried he was up there too long. So, but that was his sanctuary, and he would be very honored that it's named, the room is named after him. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll have all of the board sign this resolution and get it to you certainly. And we thank you for supporting Bill and all of the years that he did this for the town. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White.
Eric, any other words for the?
I just want to add, I had the privilege of working with Bill my first couple of years here with the town, and I enjoyed my time spent with him immensely. Just a wealth of knowledge to the town clock, and I think just knowing that it's kept time for over 100 years, 120 years, and just the meticulous detail and dedication he had to our town clock. We were able to make a video about the clock a couple of years ago. We have on the town's YouTube channel to really share that story with folks, and I just really appreciate my time spent with Bill, and thanks to the board for honoring his service with this resolution this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. Appreciate it. We'll move on then to the Chittenden County Communications Union District, and Eric, you'll lead off, and Regina Mahoney from CCRPC will be joining us by remote.
Yep. I got Regina connected right now. I saw Jeff, but it looks like it didn't quite connect for him, so I'll keep watching for him if he can get connected here. It's a good test. I'm asking Regina to unmute now.
Unmuted.
Hey, thanks, Regina. We had a Zoom issue starting the meeting here, so I had to lock down the security a little bit. I'm gonna see if I can let you share your video too if you want. I'm not sure. Can't figure that out on the fly, so I think we'll just roll with this then. Keep this. That's okay. So this evening, I provided the board with a memo, a little bit of a lengthy memo, apologies, just on the CUD piece here to follow up on our first discussion. Regina and I were able to have a call too with folks from the Bennington Regional Planning Commission to get their insight on CUDs. Is there kind of a good case for us to look at? Because if Williston and Chittenden County decide to establish a CUD, that would be a model that would be similar here. But I can, Terry, if you'd like, I can kind of walk the board through the memo. Not the whole thing, but I made some notes earlier to start the conversation, and really interested in feedback from the board this evening on additional questions the board has. If the board would like to continue this discussion at its next meeting later in the month, and at that point potentially consider a next step actions, including if it's a question you want to put to the voters in November. But for this evening, we can kind of update where we are and just continue the conversation. So as a reminder, Communications Union District, or a CUD, is a new government that enables multiple communities to work together to bring broadband internet access to those currently not served. After analysis working with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, it was determined that forming a CUD is the best current path forward to access federal funding through the Vermont Community Broadband Board to assist with this work. As a reminder, as of May, we believe Williston has about 173 addresses that don't have access to broadband level internet access, and that's a download speed of 25 megabytes per second and an upload speed of 3. And forming a CUD requires the votes of 2 communities at a town meeting. Others can join after by action by their local select board or city council. I see Jeff's in the way here. So currently, I've asked the town attorney to review the statute for CUDs, and he'll be able to present it to the board prior to the July 19th meeting. Just ask for his read on potential liability or any potential risk for the town to look at in considering this option here. So what I took with one approach in the memo is trying to think, okay, if the town decides and the voters support forming a CUD, then what happens? What would be the process that would unfold, and how is it unfolded in other CUDs around the state? So first would be forming communities would appoint delegates to the district and establish bylaws, just establish some framework behind this new government. Then if additional communities wanted to join, the option would be for a vote of their select board or councils, and the CUD would have to decide where it was in its process and if other communities would be amenable to having them join at that point. And after forming and kind of going through this pro forma for the new government, the board of directors would need to decide on a pathway to evaluate options for delivering this broadband access universally to address this in its geographic area, like the reviewing work done by additional member communities previously. We've seen in other CUDs, they've taken an approach of conducting a feasibility study to understand how to structure the project and the best approach to utilize. And there's some pre-construction grant dollars available at the state level to assist with a feasibility study through this route. A next step we've seen with peers is issuing an RFP for a provider to identify how to achieve the universal service in the CUD to then allow the district to evaluate its options moving forward. So after an RFP process and a preferred provider is identified by the CUD, it could then negotiate with that provider a contract to provide fiber service to the addresses it serves. And establishing this partnership would then unlock access to apply for the state grant funding to utilize as a component of the capital costs for this additional fiber construction for the build out. So then the CUD could seek state grant funding for construction, and Act 71 broadband grant program that the Vermont Broadband Board administers allocated $116 million in funding with rolling allocations that are now occurring for this program. Funds were initially allocated by the Vermont Community Broadband Board by the number of underserved roadway mileage in the town in proportion to the overall amount of the state. So they tried to get a starting point for how some of these grants may be made. In Williston, there's 15 miles, so Williston's kind of initial look here would be about $250,000 identified. And in CUDs in the state, these funds have been pooled as they've applied for them. A couple have received awards to date. There's discretion. The board administers these construction funds. So these funds originally identified under this methodology, it's up to the board's discretion ultimately how to award them. And this $160 million was state level ARPA funding that was allocated. So it does have a timeline for allocation the end of 2024 and to be spent by the end of 2026. Hence this moving right along at the state level to start making these grants. And we heard feedback from the Vermont Community Broadband Board that a November vote to establish a Chittenden County CUD signals the interest in these grant funds in Chittenden County member communities, as that board is looking how it wants to continue to allocate that funding with that timeline. So after grant funding is sought and hopefully awarded, a build out and funding plan could then be undertaken. And so working with a partner as the operator of the fiber network, the funding and financial plan would then need to be developed. And they also have a pre-construction grant program could be used to assist with designing the network. And finally, the network could be built and become operational. Sounds a lot easier than it really would be. There's a number of steps here and a lot of fluidity and ways this could go. You'll see in the memo, we talked with Bennington County to see how they progressed and went through this over a couple of years. Then I'll speak a little bit more about the financial picture here. A local small internet service provider conducted a preliminary estimate for Chittenden County towns earlier this year to help determine, what is the cost to connect these homes or addresses. Williston's estimate was just under $6 million, $2.4 million to reach the underserved, road miles, and another $3.5 million to connect fiber to these locations. And this is, I'll preface this is just one preliminary estimate, and then it could end up being a higher cost once this is analyzed further. Currently, the Vermont Community Broadband Board has an RFP to try to find a consultant to help answer this question for Chittenden County to understand what that cost would be, which is part of the overall picture here. The Vermont Community Broadband Board's intent with the construction grant program is for the grant dollars to cover 60% of the cost and the remaining 40% to come from other sources. And what we're finding in Chittenden County is these pockets of underserved addresses will be quite large, as we've seen with that preliminary estimate we saw for Williston. That means Williston's up to $250,000 in the grant allocation methodology by the BCBB, cover about 4.25% of the cost based on this one estimate to date. And that's just for Williston. So this ultimately, it means the funding gap needs to be filled with additional private equity from the provider, other grant sources, or the potential for the CUD to raise funds using revenue bond. This methodology used for this grant funding has been more effective throughout the rest of the state because these underserved roadway mileage is greater in communities outside Chittenden County, thus leading to the proportionate share being closer to 60% target for that grant funding. So just a few points I'll close with and then open it up for discussion here. We know the total cost of the universal service for the underserved addresses in Chittenden County is going to be well below that 60% target for the grant funding from the Vermont Community Broadband Board. And it's going to lead the CUD the need to solicit proposals to see if there's a viable financing option to make up this funding gap from a provider. During this build out to reach the underserved addresses, it will result in addresses where the fiber passes with the opportunity to access fiber internet as well. Forming a new government entity without a specific plan of how to accomplish this mission at the start is not ideal. That we're finding is the nature of this government structure and the scope of work. Planning funds can be only accessed through a CUD and not the community, Vermont community, sorry. These planning funds can only be accessed through a CUD from the Vermont Community Broadband Board. The challenge is the CUD must be created to access this federal funding that's passing through. But assurances cannot be made to the select board or voters on the outcome until the CUD forms and allows the new government to be able to access funding and issue RFPs to determine a possible pathway ahead. So there is this possibility that something will not work out and the right partner will not emerge through the RFP process. And asking the voters to possibly support the creation of a CUD, these are factors for the select board to consider whether Williston would want to be part of a CUD through the voting option or select board action if the CUD wasn't being created. The CUD is not committed to do anything if the right scenario does not present itself financially. Forming the CUD is not a done deal to bring high-speed internet to all Williston addresses. Rather, it's a first and currently best step forward to access and leverage federal funds and to work collectively with area towns and an established provider to move this project forward. So I'll pause there, and Regina, was there anything I left out?
So, questions from the board. Tonight, we're looking to see whether or not we have consensus on moving forward with proposing a vote, a townwide vote on this. So, questions for Eric?
But when do we have to make the decision on whether to put it to a vote so it can be on the ballot in November?
August 9th?
Yeah, apparently August 9th would be the deadline for the Secretary of State's office to get it on the general election ballot.
Okay.
There's probably a little more time if the board wanted to print separate local ballots for that kind of, for that larger mailing and reduce cost. August 9th would be the deadline.
So we would, if we were to agree to go forward tonight, then we would have to then pass this by legal counsel, I believe, and then come back with probably a short special select board meeting early in August in order to do an issue on the November ballot. If we were to do a separate ballot, then that would, of course, increase our cost, but I'm not sure how much, but Sarah could tell us that.
Yeah, it would probably buy a few more weeks. I'd have to get confirmation from the town clerk just once you need to order that separate ballot and that process. But probably by the end of August, the board would need to make a decision either way.
I know that we talked earlier about the towns that are considering this as well, and I think you said that at least one town is not going to pursue it.
Yep, the latest I heard, the Colchester Selectboard met last week, and the Colchester Selectboard decided that they were not going to proceed with the CUD for a vote or looking to join at this time, but should one be established, they may relook at it. But that was our feedback from Colchester. We know Essex and South Burlington have planned meetings this month, which I think Regina's planning to attend from the RPC as well. And we received feedback that Westford's Select Board is in support of the CUD, but they haven't taken a position whether they'd want to hold the vote or join, but they would like to be part of the CUD.
If we hold a vote and the voters reject it, and then the CUD is created anyway, can we then vote to join it?
That's a good question. I can check with council on that.
That was my question.
That's a good scenario. I think the way the statute's written, the statute provides the select board with that authority to join. So it might be a.
Well, the reason I don't know any of this, but I mean, one of the concerns I have is that it's a slightly confusing issue to create a new government, and then the government is going to go seek funding for broadband, kind of like the Rural Electrification Administration, but I think voters might say, well, wait a minute, is this more money? Is this going to be a tax increase, or are there hidden fees? And if they're confused, they're going to say no. And then if they say no, and I'm in favor of this. So far, I want to know a couple more things legally, but I'm concerned that if we don't present a good educational process, that it'll go down just because people, when in doubt, say no. And anyway, I don't know where that takes us, but those are my thoughts.
I'm in favor. I think I would agree that there's a lot to it. And if there's a way to and I know you've already boiled this down the best that you could tonight, even to present it to us, but I think just initially to voters of what it is, what it means, and what's not only the process, but the costs associated to an individual taxpayer would be huge. We don't have a crystal ball to look that far down the road right now, I know, but the more we can get out there for education, I think would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, my big concern, and I had shared this with Eric, was that the cost of building the infrastructure would then make it cost, the service actually cost prohibitive to the folks that would then be receiving this broadband. And it sounds like, you know, from experience from Bennington and so forth, the cost is high, but not so terribly high, and that there are some programs for low-income housing to connect as well, at a much lower rate. And so that's promising to me. And I have heard from some folks in town, you know, who are affected by this and really feeling, you know, the import of having broadband more now than ever. And so, I really want us to be responsive to them and to their needs. And so I would like to see this on the ballot. I would ideally like to not have to. I think if we have to do a special election for this, we're going to get even less support, when I think this is something that we should all be supporting for our neighbors.
Jeff, I know that Jeff was back on the remotely, but I wonder if he wants to weigh on this.
I don't see him on there still,
Not
Terry.
anymore?
Looks like it's kind of,
He was a while ago.
yeah.
And, well, I too would like to see this go forward, and certainly we have more questions and we can resolve those, I think, before we get to August 9th, when we need to make a decision.
Yeah, and we should have the legal analysis for the board before the July 19th meeting. And if there's any other questions the board has, that would be helpful for me to get you any additional information for that next meeting. Just let me know, we can prepare that.
Good. So if there are more questions, certainly get them to Eric as quickly as possible. So we'll move on then to the Community Center and Library Space Study Steering Committee. And Eric has put together a draft for us for the charge for the steering committee, as well as a resolution that has one minor typo in it. So Eric, want to talk about that?
Yep.
And I think Jane Kearns is going to join us in case we have questions for the library board.
Yep. I will, let me just get Jane connected here. A lot of activity on Zoom with people joining right now.
I'm unmuted, Eric.
Okay, thank you, Jane. So just as a reminder for the board, we are preparing a request for proposal for the FY23 capital project to undertake a scoping study for the community center facility and assessment of the Dorothy Allen Memorial Library. You received a preliminary overview at your last meeting, and as Terry mentioned, I've prepared a draft committee charge, which is and a resolution. The resolution is required by the town charter in standing up any temporary committee. This draft charge reiterates the purpose for this group that would serve as a steering committee for this project to help guide the consultant's work. The staffing would, or the membership rather, would be a member of the select board, member of the library board of trustees, and a member of the recreation and parks committee, 4 committee members at large appointed by the select board, staffed by the manager, library director, recreation and parks director. And the steering committee will have the duties and responsibilities that would include championing community engagement efforts to solicit feedback and comments from community members to aid in the development of these possible programmatic elements in these facilities for consideration. The committee would also advise the project consultant on development of possible alternatives for a community center and library space based on analysis of these possible elements for inclusion in each space and taking that community engagement under advisement while considering possible constraints that would come up. Provide periodic updates to the select board and library board of trustees on their work. And finally, review draft programmatic elements and possible space alternatives in coordination with the consultant, determine pros and cons in each, and prepare a final report and presentation for the select board and library trustees as the final deliverable. I've given the board 2 options to consider in terms of leadership of this group. One is to have the group, should you choose to establish it, elect a chairperson, a vice chairperson, or another consideration would be to establish co-chairpersons as the designee from the Select Board and the Library Board of Trustees. So, any feedback from the board on, I'll take on this proposal or questions, and certainly staff can rework this if the board wants to, some additional staff work complete.
Any questions for Eric regarding the charge, and then your preference for the option 1 or option 2?
I think the charge sounds great. As a member of the select board, potentially someone who would be on this, I would say that the officers should be folks that were elected by the committee itself, rather than just de facto, but that would be my preference.
Your preference would be option 2?
Yes.
I agree with that.
Me too.
Okay, it looks like we have option 2 as part of the charge. And if there's no other questions on the charge, then we have the resolution there. And the third whereas, there's just a one word missing, whereas to undertake this project, a steering committee made up of community stakeholders. So is there any questions or comments regarding the resolution? No. Then I'm looking for a motion.
Move to adopt the resolution and charge as presented to establish a steering committee for the community center and library assessment project.
Is there a second?
Second. Oh, go ahead.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
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 Any opposed? So we have taken care of that. We're within about 5 minutes of the opening of the public hearing, and perhaps Eric, you could do the manager's report.
Sure. Let's say not a whole lot, but I want to start out by offering a big thanks to everyone who made our Independence Day festivities possible over the past weekend. It was great to have everything back pre-pandemic, and a couple new additions with the food trucks before the fireworks. Thank all our staff and volunteers in the community that helped make that possible. A lot of work goes into it. I think the Rotary Club for organizing the Deb Beckett Memorial 5K race as well. So it was a good year. It was good weather. Heard a lot of good feedback from the community. So it's great to be able to offer that to folks in Williston every year. And I also have an update from Public Works on the Talcott Road work to replace to repair the culvert there. We should have the road reopened by the end of the week, is what I'm hearing right now. So I know a lot of people will be happy about that. So they've been working hard the last few weeks, so we are hoping to have that reopened by the end of the week here. And you might see some signs around the village that the planning department has put up, and that is part of a village walking tour. The Historical and Architectural Advisory Committee and the Planning Commission are working on some village bylaw amendments, drafting, and this is a community engagement part of that work. So you'll see there's some brochures. I think Station 1 is right out front of the town hall. You can also have a virtual tour online as well as a way to provide feedback. So I'm going to do the full loop of the tour, but I know our planning office put a lot of hard work into setting that up. So encourage the community to take part in that effort.
Great. We're expecting some of our planning commission members and also Matt Belanger, the Director of Planning, to join us for the public hearing.
I'll send Matt a message to let him know we're all set.
He'll be here in person, I presume?
Yep.
Okay.
I know the Planning Commission was just calling a meeting to order next door.
So pending their arrival, I will open the public hearing at this point and read the warning for the public hearing. The Williston Selectboard will hold a public hearing to receive comment on proposed changes to the existing Williston Unified Development Bylaw to create a form-based code overlay district in the Taft Corners area and establish an official map for the entire town pursuant to 24 VSA, Section 4442, and the Williston Unified Development Bylaw. Public hearing will take place on Tuesday, July 5th, 2022 at 7:15 in the Beckett McGuire Meeting Room at Williston Town Hall. And we are here. And before we go into it, we have quite a number of people in the room. Can I get a show of hands as to how many people plan on speaking tonight? Looks like about 7 or 8. Okay, and likewise on the remote setup, can we find people who plan on speaking tonight remotely?
Yep. I've got folks watching remotely. If you wouldn't mind just raising your virtual hand to just help us get an idea of how many folks want to speak. I've got 2 hands raised online, Terry. There's 34 people overall on Zoom.
Just
so,
2?
Up to 3 now. I think we'll have more trickle in here as we go, but I know there are 34 people on Zoom right now according to this here. So probably an estimate of around 10 people or so overall for comments so far.
So right now we're expecting perhaps about 20 people to join. So number of things for the ground rules for the public hearing. Obviously, we're looking for civil discourse to have people respect the process and each other. When you are called to speak, please come up to the microphone and identify yourself, and likewise on remote, you please identify yourself there. We'll try to keep this as orderly as we can to keep people at the microphone or on remote as well as we can. I'm going to impose a time limit of no more than 3 minutes each to speak. You speak shorter if you wish to, but no longer than 3 minutes each. And that would give us at least an hour's of presentations. The part of the ground rules also will be people will be able to speak once before speaking, and if we get through everybody and there's people who wish to speak a second time, we can consider that, but we'll look and see what time we have at that point in time. So we're waiting for Matt to, perhaps Eric, you can just start off.
Actually, Terry, I received a message on my phone from Jeff Fears.
Yeah.
He has tried repeatedly to participate via Zoom, and he's having huge technical problems, so he's not going to be able to do it.
Okay.
But he wants everybody to know that he will watch the video recording of the meeting and will be aware of what everybody's saying.
Good, thank you. For people who have arrived and might not have signed in, please do so before you leave. That would be helpful to us as well.
The Planning Commission is en route from the annex, so
They're what?
the Planning Commission and Matt Belanger are en route from the annex next door, so
okay,
we'll be here momentarily.
We'll wait until they arrive, and then we can start off with you introducing Matt and the process and the memo that he has written regarding the process and what we might expect to be able to do.
Yep, let's pull that up here, Terry. So for the board this evening, and you open your public hearing, you will have an option if you want to continue the hearing to a later date if there's still additional public comment to take, or if the board would like to leave it open. Or the board can also close the public hearing this evening. Either is recommended the board make a motion either way for how it likes to proceed after taking public testimony this evening.
Welcome to members of the Planning Commission. There's seats over here as well as done. A few over on the other side as well. All right. Welcome.
Thanks
So our
for your
Director of
patience.
Planning, Matt Belanger, is here, and we'll lead off with Eric. Do you want to say a few words before Matt goes over his memo?
Yep, Matt's going to walk through for everyone in the room and listening at home, just a brief overview of the transmittal of this development bylaw amendment before the select board this evening. And there'll be time to open up for public comment.
Welcome,
Great.
Matt.
Thank you. So as Eric said, I'm going to begin with an overview that is probably pretty familiar to the board and most folks in the room. But this is the first public hearing on the proposed Taft Corners Form-Based Code Overlay District, associated zoning bylaw amendments, and townwide official map together as a package in support of the Taft Corners vision as developed by Williston citizens and our consultant team about a year ago. The form-based code is a slightly different way of doing zoning. It is related more to how buildings are designed and how they're placed on their sites, and how those sites are arranged on a pre-planned, master-planned grid of walkable, bikeable, pedestrian-friendly streets. And all of those components that I mentioned in the beginning work together to create that arrangement of walkable blocks, attractive buildings, primarily served by access to the rear through alleys and leaving streets clear. And the form-based code contains components related to the maps I mentioned, related to how the public realm, the area between the building and the street, is to be designed, related to where parking, loading, and other building functions are to be placed, where building uses are to be allowed, whether they're ground floor or also allowed on upper floors. Then those building form standards, including height, width, depth, maximum footprint, and architectural standards, i.e. how the building is dressed with windows, doors, required balconies, elements including roof pitch, screening of rooftop mechanical equipment, etc. So it is a complete zoning package that addresses all aspects of building and site design, and then goes so far as to pre-plan how those sites would be arranged within a grid of walkable streets that would interface with the existing streets in the Taft Corners area. So the Select Board has had a number of informational meetings on this topic, chose at its last one to warn tonight's public hearing, which begins the process of considering the adoption of this code. I have prepared, in addition to the overview memo that you've had for some time, 2 new memos tonight. One discusses the hearing process and simply reminds the Select Board that the step that follows from the holding of a public hearing tonight is either a decision to continue that hearing to a subsequent date, provided that the Select Board feels there needs to be more time to hear public comment, or to close that public hearing, at which point the next step is a meeting where the board might consider the adoption of the code, bylaw amendments, and map. And then in discussing that procedure, remind the Select Board that if the Select Board chooses to make any substantive changes to the draft, and under statute you don't have to change very much for it to be considered substantive, there would need to be another warned hearing to hear that revised draft, followed by a meeting and again consideration of adoption. So tonight can really be focused on hearing that public comment and giving lots of time and space for that to happen. The memo that I prepared that goes beyond procedures talks about some of those potential amendments. We spent considerable time at the end of June hearing from some of our major landowner stakeholder community about changes they would like to see. I've continued dialogue with that community and attempted to summarize in that memo some of the high points of what those folks are asking the board to consider. We can talk about that during the meeting, during the hearing, sort of at the Select Board's decision, but I think most of what I've heard in my follow-up conversations from that community are very similar to what the board heard on June 17th. So some requests for some shifts of boundary of what of the growth center would be in the form-based code overlay district and what might be left out. And some discussion of the regulating plan map that we would start with and how that street layout might be adjusted to create some more buildable area in a few spots. So we can circle back to that either toward the end of the hearing or as part of the meeting and work sessions that might follow from tonight's hearing. And I also mentioned that the select board may decide it wants to make some changes to this draft based on what it hears from the public, either has been hearing in writing or out in the community or what it hears tonight. And when I was writing this memo on Friday, I couldn't predict for you everything you might hear tonight and want to respond to, and in fact, I still can't. But we do know that building height has been a significant issue raised by a lot of members of the public, certainly heavily discussed by the Planning Commission as well, and many of them are with us tonight and can answer questions about some of the policy decisions they made in arriving where they did on building height. But I did want to touch on that a little bit before opening things up. People talk about form-based code. They say, well, it's really focused on the building form and not so much the use, and that's true. And it's not the only thing that form-based codes tend to look at a little bit differently than conventional zoning does. So today, in the Taft Corners District, we look at height as a number of feet above average finished grade, and the maximum number is 52. That has to include the entire roof. It does not include mechanical equipment above that roof or any screening that's installed around that mechanical equipment. So you can actually end up with something pretty close to the 64-foot height limit that we're talking about in the form-based code. But height as measured in feet is not the only way the form-based code talks about height. It talks about it in terms of stories, and it measures it from a slightly different point on the ground. It measures it from what we call the clear sidewalk elevation, i.e. the sidewalk. And that can have some impact on how much overall height you experience. So in the most intense zones in this code, you have a maximum height of 5 stories and no more than 64 feet to the top plate of that top story. The code also incentivizes the use of pitched roofs. In fact, requires pitched roofs as long as a roof is not being used for mechanical equipment or for rooftop solar equipment. So in that pitched roof, you can use dormers to make some of the space inside the pitched roof a habitable story above that 5-story limit. So a lot of posts on Front Porch Forum and comment we've received has been a negative reaction to the idea of the 6-story building. We talk about it as 5 plus an attic story because when you put that attic story in a pitched roof, its volume is smaller than the stories below it. It's living in a roof that's got some pitch, somewhere between a 5/12 and a 14/12 pitch. So just some things to put a little context around the idea of 5 stories plus an attic story or 6 stories. The Planning Commission spent a lot of time thinking about that maximum allowed height in those more intense zones and was really striking a balance between wanting to provide a lot of opportunity to share the high cost of land with a larger number of dwelling units and an opportunity to make housing more affordable in Williston, and also balancing that increase in building height over what the current zoning allows against all of the things that are required in those architectural standards. 30% of units facing the street need to have a balcony. There's minimum amounts of windows that must be on that street-facing side of the building. Windows need to be inset by 3 inches. They can't be flat up against the wall, which reduces the massiveness of the building. Buildings need entrances every 70 feet along a street frontage. So those are a whole lot of things that cut down on the feel of the massiveness of the building. And lastly, in those zones where that larger height is allowed, building footprints are limited to 20,000 square feet. And this prevents the very large, either, depending on who you talk to, the side scraper or the land scraper configuration, where you have a very large building that maybe takes up an entire block face. You just cannot do that in a 20,000 square foot footprint. So Planning Commission and staff and consultant team in talking about building height was looking at something that was a meaningful increment above what's allowed today to try to create a little more affordability, but along with a whole load of architectural standards to make that an attractive building whose massiveness was not its defining characteristic, but rather that way that it was dressed. So I'll leave that there. There can certainly be some follow-ups with commission members or myself about height. And the last thing I wanted to mention coming out of the amendments memo is just want to make the select board aware we are also undergoing legal review with town council on the entire code. Council has completed that preliminary review and has raised a few issues of things that might need to be worded differently or addressed slightly differently, but no major red flags of, you can't do that with zoning in Vermont or anything like that. So we've had very positive conversations there. Any needed changes coming out of legal review could be made part of a subsequent draft that the select board looks at during that meeting process and at a subsequent warrant hearing if necessary.
Good, thank you, Matt. So this is now the time for public to weigh in on the proposed code, and so we'll go to our first speaker over here. To come to the table and identify yourself in no more than 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Elizabeth Logan. I'm a Williston resident, and I have 2 comments. First, I understand that the code doesn't address and is not intended to address mixed income housing, and I'm wondering where this is being discussed. We have some Williston core values, one of which is compassionate, fair, and equitable service, which states that services should be delivered in a manner that's fair, equitable, and reflects compassion. If this is one of our values, I'm wondering why we're not taking every opportunity to welcome and encourage a rich mixture of people from a wide range of economic and social backgrounds. The developers will not choose to create mixed income housing on their own. Perhaps this could be addressed in the code or in some other manner so that we have enforceable requirements that ensure more affordable housing. And Taft's Corners is a great place to start. We'll not have another chance like this to put our values into action for many years. We're overdue in insisting on a framework that's more inclusive, welcoming, and enforceable. My second comment is regarding environmental and preservation aspects of the code. I don't believe the code goes far enough to preserve and maintain our green space. In considering the green space, it's not accurate, including wetland areas, inaccessible areas, and privately owned land, if we want an honest picture to work with. Development seems to take precedence, and the actual green space is encroached upon with every development. Especially in Taft's Corners, there's nothing left. By increasing the height of buildings, the views will no longer be available as well. Again, we need grit, determination, and enforceable code that limits encroachment and holds developers responsible for following plans that protect and even reclaim all usable green space. Thank you.
Thank you. And staff will be taking notes, I think, as to the questions that are being asked. So, anyone else in the front row that wishes to speak?
My name is Marcia Drake. We moved here in 1994. And on this side of the highway, it has sort of felt like there's been a free-for-all development. And if perception is 99% of reality, I'm sure that's not actually what was happening, but it sort of has felt like that. And I feel as if there's finally a thoughtful, sort of inclusive design happening here that's not going to please everyone, but it feels like finally the community has been asked and has gotten involved. And that feels so much better than what was happening before. The height has definitely been an issue. I feel as if this actually allows more space for people to live without sprawl. And within that, perhaps there can be a percentage of affordable housing allowed in these taller buildings. That seems that would be a part of what was talked about earlier in Williston, wanting to very much have more affordable housing. And to me, as much as those buildings may seem a bit high, the description of how they were thought through makes a lot more sense to me. And I hope that the Planning Commission will keep that into consideration instead of thinking about more sprawl.
Good, thank you. Anyone else in the front room? Next gentleman, and then you, no, first one in the, whichever, let it out.
All right, I'm going to take my mask here.
Yes, please.
I am Grant Thinkin, full disclosure. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be heard. And I want to let you know I'm representing myself, no organization that I'm part of. I've lived in Williston for over 40 years and seen things like the horse farm on Taft Corners get replaced by building developments that's concrete. Then a promise is made to finally create a village town center. What we have now was called a compromise back then. A compromise from a pyramid enclosed mall to what we have now. A compromise? Come on. The community green at Taft Corners is a strip mall that was bent into the shape of a donut with a wide concrete sidewalk in the hole, and then a two-lane road in the middle of that, and then a green space. So when anybody's standing in the green space or walking, no matter where they look, they see a strip mall. So tomorrow I'm going to splurge a little. I'm going to get a water bottle, and I'm going to be driving to Taft Corners from my home just off French Hill. I'm sure I'll be happy with my purchase, but as always, I have to admit, I'll be sad to be at the big box Taft Corners again. As usual, I'll want to leave as quickly as possible, and then cheer up by driving away from Williston, likely to the town of Richmond. Listening to others speak, we all know that my sentiment about Taft Corners is typical. In the past, the town has given in too much to developers, letting them act more as consultants rather than stakeholders for input. So please don't make that mistake again. The Taft Corners form-based code is an opportunity. Don't blow it by over-compromising. I trust that the carefully Taft Corners form-based code also has an opportunity for stakeholders to make money. The need for more affordable housing in Williston is critical, but adding more affordable housing now to the Taft Corners form-based code as a requirement will only make the change of this developer-town agreement unlikely. I don't know how far back the town implemented incentive affordable housing inclusion, but I know it was a while back. The town took a chance that the developers would buy into an incentivized affordable housing option, but lost big time. How much new developing affordable housing has been developed since then? Very little, if any, I think. It's long overdue to make affordable housing not incentivized, but compliant in zoning. The longer the town waits on developing more affordable housing, the more risky it will be probably to succeed. I hope that the Planning Commission and the Energy and Community Development Department shortly act to bring more affordable housing that Williston needs after the Taft Corners form-based code is approved. We are way past due. Thank you.
Thanks.
My name is Carl Fowler. I live at 178 Meadow Run Road. And although I have in the past been an officer of the Meadow Run Association, I'm here speaking for myself tonight and not in any way for the association. I applaud the form-based code effort by the town. And I hope you proceed with it, and I hope, as with the last speaker, you do not overly modify it. The cat is out of the bag in a sense. So much of the Taft Corners area has already been developed, and portions of it are, of course, sensibly protected, that this is not going to result in a massive change in the feeling or style of the housing or the developed industrial and retail units, but it can at least make them more aesthetically pleasing, and to the degree that it can concentrate development into a smaller area but encourage more mix, it's highly developable, desirable. And again, I simply applaud it. I am concerned about height of units, but if I have to balance a 3 or 4 story building against having virtually no open space, I'm prepared to accept a compromise. I am concerned about low-income housing, definitely. We have very little of it, and we need more of it, even for our children, where they're going to live if they want to stay in town. And we cannot allow form to ignore balance in the environment. The Supreme Court did us no favors last week by undermining the federal government's ability to regulate environmental codes, but that design change did not necessarily affect towns and states. So if we come up with a plan like this, which can produce a better aesthetic for the community, I think it is highly desirable. But there is one other consequence that needs to be looked at with this. Because the Taft Corners area is only a small part of the town, and the rest of the areas beyond it will have a completely different set of rules applying to them, there could be the possibility of a spillover of pressure into other areas of town that were intended to stay more open because of the desire to build and the lack of land to continue to build and build within the Taft Corner radius. Adjacent to the intersection of Mountain View and Route 2A, an industrial way, multiple neighborhoods are pending construction. The church property, hundreds of units, 19 some units between our neighborhood Meadow Run and Mountain View in the next 2 or 3 years, 57 units from the church property across Mountain View Road. These areas also need the attention to things that have been ignored so far. Neighborhoods becoming conveyances of through traffic that formerly had cul-de-sac roads, opening up of sewage lines and pumping capacity, concerns regarding stormwater. And I encourage you, while adopting the form-based code, and I hope you will, not to forget that the rest of the town has concerns about the pace of development and the lack of balance in that development as well. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you. Anyone in the first row or on this side who wishes to speak?
My name is Donna Roser. I haven't attended all the form-based meetings, but I have attended many. I am disappointed to see the amount of development that has occurred over the years and will continue to occur in Williston, and the negative consequences of high-density development, including loss of wooded lands, increase in traffic, which is already bad, and stressors to our schools, fire, and police departments, to name a few. But I'm realistic to know that development will happen, so then it's a matter of providing input to make it as palatable as possible. We're talking now about development in the growth area of the town, but rest assured, as long as it is profitable, development will slowly expand to other parts of town, maybe where you live. I've said this before, but I would like to say once again that I do not agree with the proposed height of the buildings that would be allowed with this form-based development. Ideally, I would like to see buildings 2 stories in height, definitely not more than 3 stories. I know that some people will weigh the many negatives of this type of development by saying, well, tall buildings will provide affordable housing. In response, I'd like to say, 1, developers are not required to offer affordable housing. There are some benefits to them if they offer affordable housing as far as the speed in developing a project, but it is not required. To assume that more affordable housing will be offered is not a guarantee. In fact, I was at one meeting, and to paraphrase the developer, He said, if it's going to cost me $10 million to build the roads to conform to this new code, there goes your affordable housing. Number two, with this form-based development and taller buildings, it does not necessarily mean more apartments, as the owner does not need to designate the use of the buildings. It may be apartments, but there's no guarantee saying it will be. Three, what is affordable? It's defined in accordance to calculations, but I think most of us would say the end result is not affordable, especially to those in need, or maybe even to retired people seeking housing within their means. 4, there are currently 24 affordable apartments in Finney Crossing that have been available for a couple of years now. How many of them are rented to retail workers working in Williston? I don't know. You don't know. In fact, the town doesn't even know. There is no nonprofit entity overseeing the town's designated affordable housing. Currently, the building owner sends an annual spreadsheet listing the unit and the amount being charged for rent. There appears to be a severe lack of oversight, ensuring the eligibility of those renters, amount being charged for rent, etc., for units currently designated as affordable housing. I also think, number 5, I also think affordable housing is a red herring. At another meeting for a proposed development, Ken Bellevue, former Williston town planner, who was working for the developer and speaking on his behalf, said that store workers would be able to afford to buy homes in the development that will be built at the Catamount Golf Course. When I followed up with him on that and asked, you mean to say a couple working at Walmart would be able to buy a home here? He replied, well, maybe the manager. An argument one might make is that current regulations allow for 4-story buildings, so the new code isn't much more than that. However, I don't believe there are many 4-story buildings currently in Williston.
You're running out of time.
One that readily comes to mind is a hotel being built in the post office parking lot. I've said that from the beginning, this is a hideous building. Some may say, well, it's because of the placement of the building. Yes, but it is also the height in comparison to the buildings around it stands. There are many reasons why we moved here 27 years ago. One being we enjoyed the character of the town and had no desire to live in a city, which it seems to be what Williston is evolving to. In closing, this board has a serious responsibility that will shape the future of Williston. Some of the longer-term board members were involved in the changes to the town plan. I didn't read all of this, but previously the town plan talked, we changed the town plan to allow Finney Crossing. Nobody likes that. We allowed Route 2 to change from residential to commercial, and that's, we're seeing the destruction of the forest there. We're seeing big U-Haul buildings and other buildings to come. So previously, some of you on the board were responsible in that, and I would urge you to take serious consideration before rubber stamping this proposal. And I also have the rest of this if anybody would like to read it. Send it to you folks.
Thank you. Anyone else in the front room over here that wishes to speak tonight? If not, we'll go to the remote viewers for 4 or 5 people there. So we have some more in the room to speak as well.
Yep. First person, Stephen G. I'm going to let you unmute here just a moment.
Hi, my name is Steve Gioacchini. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
You have 3 minutes.
Great. I won't take that long. I have to get the kid to bed. I just looking at this, and I'm wondering if the town of Williston is prepared to become the city of Williston. What are they prepared to do? I know we just took on a lot of new fire department and police department. Having more large buildings like this is going to take on more responsibility. And so is the town of Williston prepared for that kind of, growth? Is the town of Williston prepared to move large-scale buildings like this into the Williston Village? Is that acceptable? Where else is acceptable to keep on developing? We have a lot of large houses, being sold, new houses and current houses that are being sold at really astronomical prices. And looking at a lot of these houses, these could have been much smaller houses and housing a lot more people in these neighborhoods, like Brennan Woods and such. And instead we built gigantic houses that people really probably don't need. It's up to them to decide, but why did Williston allow that? So on a note like that, now we're gonna build a bunch of Panelak style buildings. And are we just open to the public so everyone just keeps on moving and moving and moving here? So is the, you know, is the greater population wagging the tail, or is the developers wagging the tail? Who's making the decisions? And so these are just questions I would like to post and let everybody think about it. What do we want to become? Do we want to be the town of Williston, or do we want to be the city of Williston and have all the city troubles that come along with that? So, thank you.
Thank you. Next on remote.
Yep, Lisa Braden Harder, just a second, I'll ask you to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So as Willistonians consider changes to the town zoning regulations, we as members of the Williston Racial Equity Partnership support the form-based code recommendation by the DRB and staff. Those opposed to the changes often point to the possible loss of a favorite scenic spot caused by the construction of taller buildings. Though we share this appreciation for the natural beauty surrounding our town, we would encourage broader thinking on the issue. We all want a thriving Williston community with neighbors of all ages and backgrounds. Housing plays a big role in this vision and therefore needs to be more inclusive. The current focus on single-family homes serves the top 20% of Vermonters by income, excluding many families with children, as well as older Vermonters on fixed incomes. As we plan for the future of our town, we want to consider the employees of many Williston businesses as well. Our retail and manufacturing workers help create over 40% of our town revenues and double our population during the day, but cannot afford to live here. Our town and school employees help us build this community, but they have few housing options under the current zoning. Adopting the form-based code gives every Willistonian the chance to play a part in planning for the bright, inclusive future of our town. The Williston Racial Equity Partnership supports this change, and we hope you will too. And lastly, I'd just like to thank the staff for the inclusive community input that they sought during this process. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next on remote.
Abe Harrison, I'll unmute you here in just a second.
Thank you. Good evening. I have had the luck and privilege to have moved to Williston just about a year ago. And I say luck because of the amazing neighborhood we found. And I say privilege because Williston is a wonderful town to be living in. But I also say luck because, as anyone who has lived through the real estate market in the past year, it was really luck that we were able to find an available house. And I also say privilege because we had the privilege of getting assistance from our family to be able to purchase our first home, which is increasingly becoming the only way that anybody can purchase a new home these days. As we all know, there is a housing shortage in Vermont, and the best way to address that shortage is by building more housing, all kinds of housing. No matter what it is, any new housing will relieve the burden on our current housing market and make it more affordable for everybody. And when given the choice of where and how to build that housing, the best option is tall, dense housing close to amenities, most especially because it's good for the environment. It is more efficient to provide power and services to many families on one plot of property instead of one family on that same plot of property. And the closer that people live to their jobs, to groceries, to shops, and other amenities, the less dependent that they will be on polluting motor vehicles. So I strongly support the proposals here today, and am excited for the future of Williston. And I will simply say that as long as the easiest and most efficient form of building under laws and regulations remains single-family housing, the more sprawl that we will see in Williston, the more it will benefit the wealthiest people in Vermont and in the country who are able to move here, and the worse it will be for our environment. And so the proposals that are here tonight are the best for Vermont and for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person on remote.
John Hemmelgarn, just a moment here, John.
Good evening. My name is John Hemmelgarn. I am a Williston resident, a DRB member, and an architect. The following comments are personal views and not those of the DRB. My position on the DRB and as an architect do give me a unique perspective on the proposed form-based code, though. I support the proposed code. There have been comments that the current process works very well because projects are frequently improved through the DRB review process. These are kind words and ones appreciated by me and the rest of the DRB, if I would allow myself to speak for them just this one time. We work hard to be professional and understand our role in the process. I work professionally with many of the people who come before our board and frequently hear comments about the professionalism of both the staff and the board. My professional experience in front of other boards tells me the exact same thing. This board takes its role as arbiter of the Williston Development Bylaw, the WDB, very seriously, and we try very hard to stay within the bounds of our charge. Therefore, the DRB actually has limited ability to improve projects. The opportunities we do have to steer projects is limited to the very narrow range spelled out in the WDB. I would liken it to one's ability to steer a raft ride at the amusement park by shifting one's weight as one of 5 people in the tube. If you can convince all the others in the raft to shift together, maybe you get a little extra speed or a splash or whatever you're looking for. A single person acting alone has almost no impact. Finally, and especially, the small changes we are able to make have nothing to do with public satisfaction, nor are they a nod to any general public guidance or consensus. In fact, it seems they may actually miss their mark as often as not, given the mixed opinions one hears about any given project. Alternatively, the form-based code allows the opportunity for far greater public satisfaction with any given outcome, since it has been developed with a tremendous amount of public input. Input that is focused on aesthetic components, quality of life, and citizens' everyday interface with their built environment. This code will improve how Willistonians feel about their town. The form-based code is a far longer looking document than the current WDB, as it assures each puzzle piece is much less dependent on the previously fitted pieces, making the ultimate outcome much more predictable. The best part is that this predictable outcome is one that has been discussed at great length and reflects the priorities and values of the general community. Any concern that this may slow development in Williston may or may not be true. My crystal ball is in the repair shop right now. If this is the case, I sense this might also reflect the priorities and values of the general community. I am much more certain that Williston will continue to grow and that we are doing ourselves a great service by trying to have a greater say in the ultimate vision of that future. In summary, significant changes would be contrary to the rigorous public input process that was undertaken, negating what I feel is one of the strongest reasons to adopt a form-based code: public consensus on what we in Williston have decided is best for our town. Changing the code now based on the voices of a relative few would be contrary to the myriad voices heard throughout this process. Thank you for your time and for giving me the opportunity to express my personal thoughts on this matter.
Yep, that's the last one remote. Terry, I'm going to connect you.
Okay, great. Hi, this is Terry Zittridge. So I've spoken here before. I'll maybe talk about the same things here. So, one of the things that I have found disappointing with the form-based code, which in general, I support most of it. I had the opportunity to speak at length with Chapin Kaner. I think he's on the committee or board, and he took me through the whole thought process here. But the part that's disappointing and continues to be disappointing about our planning is the fact that affordable housing isn't put in. And I hear people talk about the fact that, well, if we build 6-story buildings, they're going to be affordable. I suspect the same thought was put into that other eyesore on the, the northwest corner of Taft's Corners, the tall buildings there. I don't know what anybody was thinking or what the Planning Commission at the time was thinking. It's just an eyesore. It doesn't remind me of Williston. So if we can truly get affordable housing in this, I mean, I'm all for building taller buildings if it means making housing more accessible and to more people, to the people that work in Williston. So I'll say that, but if there is no affordable housing, then I don't know why we need 6-story buildings at Taft Corners. So 4 to 5 years ago, I'm not exactly sure the exact set of meetings, but it was the last time I was engaged in the town plan update, and I was pushing Mr. Bollinger to add some kind of affordable clause into that. And it was forced affordability because it doesn't, as the person who first spoke, it doesn't seem like developers are very incented in Williston to build anything but, I'll call them McMansions. You know, they're not mansions, but they're in the higher range of single family housing. And at the time, and I can't quote it exactly, although I could probably look up the video, that I was told that it didn't make any sense because there wasn't enough developable land in Williston to make that useful. Well, that certainly isn't true or was true and continues not to be true. So, so I'd really like to see affordable housing put into this somehow. And if not, then we should keep the building height to some reasonable level, 4 stories, if we're not going to make it affordable. Otherwise, we're just selling ourselves out. We're selling our views out to developers who are going to put high rent apartments in. So, and we don't need more of those. And that's it.
Thank you. We'll go back to the room and for a few people here. So the second row over here, somebody wishes to speak. Yes, sir.
I'm Jay Petrillo, resident of Williston for about 30 years now. I have some concerns about the current plan right now, and if you look at history, the early stages of the Manhattan Project, I'll be very brief. Oppenheimer et al., their initial fear for developing the atomic bomb was the chain reaction. How would they stop the chain reaction? And the idea was it would ignite the atmosphere and the oceans, that the idea of nuclear fission would create these intense temperatures, and how do you put an end to it? So in looking at this, the future of Williston, what is the end game? What is capacity? And there are some current concerns. One is Velco, Vermont Electric Power Company, and looking at the 2021 Vermont Long Range Transmission Plan on page 6, it specifically states that they're looking at, I just lost it. The current flow adjustments will no longer be effective and grid reinforcement will be required. We're sending a lot of juice on antiquated lines. And a visual is just looking at Taft Corners right now. And more building, more need for electricity. And yes, Vermont, by 2050, claimed that 90% of all our energy needs will be met by non-renewables. By renewables, non-fossil fuels. 50% right now is tied to Hydro-Quebec. There's 2 transmission lines, multi-billion-dollar projects in the works. One is currently a multi-billion project, the Hudson Power Express transmission line directly from Hydro-Quebec to New York City. That was approved in April 2022. And the most recent one in Vermont, I don't know where that is right now, connecting Hydro-Quebec and going through Alberg. It's a 1,000 megawatt line. So imagine it follows the spine all the way to Taft Corners. So in this, my question is, where is capacity and what do we have in the works right now in controlling any type of growth? Second concern I want to bring up, the 2020 census, the median-based household income in Vermont is $63,477. Individual income is $35,854. One resident pointed out a couple working at Walmart, where would they live? And how can they afford living in this town? So if you apply the thirds, the rule of thirds, a median household income is $63,000. That means if you apply the rule of thirds for a mortgage, they need to look for a house for $180,000. And I believe the current median price for a house in Williston is over $400,000. So right now, the more building, the more people we need to work in these places. So I'm just asking, when will we have these discussions at various levels of detail? And looking at mytapcorners.com, says that architectural will be pleasing. And I'm not quite sure, that's a little vague. What does that mean? And what style? Victorian style? You know, federal style? So that's all I have to say right now.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone in the second row here? Yes.
Hi, I'm Marcy Cass. I just want to say that the fireworks last night were really excellent. Totally excellent. So I say I have to sort of like edit because so many people have said what I was going to say. I will say that even though I'm so happy to be living in this town, I think that it's full of great people who show up. I mean, but I have very low expectations, I have to admit, for what our town feels like, which has been echoed. I'm echoing what a lot of people have said, but I feel like if this form-based code, which I'm all in favor of, if it doesn't proceed, I won't be surprised. So my expectations are low, but you know, I feel like there's a lot of great people in Williston, so that skews my expectations a lot higher. I went to almost all of the My Taft Corners information Zoom things, and it seems like a really good plan to me. It seems like it's a win-win for Williston. I think it's a win for those of us who live here, and it could turn our town into someplace we want to spend time and not just shop. And I think to me, it could be a win for developers because it has the potential to increase revenue because of, you know, building up. Now, I have heard from a developer, I believe, in one of the hearings that it's going to be hard to rent living spaces that are above commercial spaces. And I want to say a few things about that because I feel like our world is changing. I feel like I don't think that's really the case. I feel like our world is changing because more commerce is happening online and more people are working from home. And so I feel like brick and mortar stores are an opportunity for social contact. And I mean, I have, my sister works at Williams Sonoma, and she has been told that for some people, this is their only social interaction when they come into a store. I feel that way, like sort of like post-ish COVID, you know, going back and shopping, and I feel it's great to talk to people. And I want to say also about some people have been saying they don't want, you know, oh, it's going to be the city of Williston, not the town of Williston, and having concerns about the height of buildings. So I used to live in New York City for 10 years before the 35 years I've lived in Vermont, 26 of them in Williston. And I felt like the sense of community, you know, on the Upper West Side, and the walkability and the interesting nature of the neighborhoods was greater in New York City than it is in Taft Corners. So I feel like preserving this like Vermont quality that's existing in Williston, I think there's sort of like a disconnect of reality of what it really feels like. And I feel like, so my father was an architect, and I feel like I have like a sensibility about buildings, and it's not just the height of a building that makes you feel a certain way. It's the placement, it's all kinds of things. You can have, you can have, one thing that I'm really excited about is the potential to have some really cool buildings. And that maybe, someone mentioned open air spaces on the first floor that are covered. So, and flex spaces for indoor play in the winter, and rooftop gardens and green construction, and a new building that would look cool and would generate interest. And I think that there's a, you know, instead of just worrying, okay, oh, I fear that the buildings are going to be too tall, I feel that whatever, it would be great to work from a place of positive, like excitement, that it could be something that's really cool, buildings that's really cool, and I'd be happy to be on those committees.
Thank you. And anybody else in the second row wishes to speak? Yes.
Hello, I'm Danielle Doucette. I'm going to be quick. I would like to add my voice to support walkable, bikeable, pedestrian-friendly streets in Williston. I would also like to support previous speakers' points about incentivizing affordable housing while preserving our green space in our community. And finally, I'd love to see solar panels and heat pumps and electric vehicle chargers in all new buildings in Williston. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, Kevin Thorley, Williston resident, member of the Energy Committee, but here speaking for myself. First of all, I'd like to thank the Planning Department for the thorough, open, and inclusive process they hosted. I think it's a model for how work like this should be done moving forward. The amount of effort they put in was really impressive. I support the proposed changes. Today, going to Taft's Corner feels like leaving Williston. The box stores and the heavy traffic are not conducive to the kind of community interactions that many Williston residents appreciate. The current code supports the needs of many people in northern Vermont, maybe even northern New York, but it doesn't support the kind of community that the residents of Williston like and deserve. Williston is growing, and while that growth and its impact on town services, taxes, et cetera, should be discussed, I don't believe this plan is part of the problem. I believe this plan could be a part of the solution to ensure that growth happens in a responsible way that is aligned with the desires of the town residents. This code supports a place where people want to live and work. It will help to de-emphasize a car-centric culture in favor of safer and easier walking and biking. I believe this code will also result in more small businesses frequented by residents who have easy access to those businesses without the need to drive there. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't see if anybody else is in the second row over there, but I don't think so. We'll go to the remote then.
No one else remote at this time, Terry.
Nobody else?
No one else at this time.
Then we'll start on the third row. If anybody wishes, yes, 3 minutes.
My name is David Martell. I live in Williston. And actually made a bunch of notes, but after listening to everybody's comments and stuff, just kind of recap on some of this information. So the first gentleman that came up that works for the zoning department, he talked about the design of the building itself, having the windows recessed, and some other measurements where it's made from the sidewalk. The reality is, a building is a building. If it's 64 feet to the top of the 5th floor, the additional 6th floor living space is going to add another 11 feet, so you're talking about 76 feet. A 14-12 pitch roof is what you guys have in your documentation. That allows for the dormers to be on the building. And that's a very aggressive and very steep pitch roof. So if you've got a building, let's say 80 feet wide, or say 80 feet wide, you're adding another 30 feet onto that building for a pitch roof with the dormers on it, of course. So you're looking at a building, you know, you can say, hey, the windows make it look like it's not as big, but it's still there and it's going to block your view. Now, I hear a lot of people, they talk about affordable housing. Now, affordable housing, it's kind of like a pipe dream. I think you're thinking more of low-income housing, because I don't think, is there any low-income housing in Vermont, in Williston? Anybody? I don't think so. Okay, so affordable housing, my sister's son lives in one of the Finney Crossing apartments. I think it's like almost $1,800 a month. He works at a regular job making 17, 18 bucks an hour. Girlfriend situation, probably about the same. That's not affordable. So right now, my sister and her husband actually have to subsidize their income for them to live in that apartment. That's not affordable housing. You know, that's to pay, they're relying on somebody to pay to help assist you to live into a housing situation. Low-income housing is obviously based on your income that you have. I think the buildings next to Shaw's, those are low-income housing, aren't they? I think they are, probably. Right, but the situation is, you talk about adding more, a taller building, offering more affordable housing. That's just not a situation that's gonna happen. If you consider affordable housing, instead of paying $2,200 a month, that you're only paying $1,800 a month, well, that is more affordable, but it's not really affordable for anybody that's working at, say, Walmart, Dunkin' Donuts, your local stores that are making under $20 an hour. That's not an affordable situation. So adding additional floors to a building, which is going to ruin the aesthetics of Williston, if you ask me, when you're driving through. And I notice a lot of people here, they come from New York City, they like the tall buildings, the architecture. Being born and raised here in the 4th generation in Vermont, I'm not a big fan of it. I live in Vermont because it's a town. I live in Williston because it's a town, not because it's a city. If I wanted a city, I'd take a vacation, I'd go visit the city. But I like it here because it's actually a town. All right, we talk about the open space. So, as we mentioned in the last meeting, that you folks brought up, the how much is it going to cost to purchase this open space? How are you going to acquire it? How's the town going to get it? Right now, the people that own that open space, they pay taxes. That's tax revenue that's coming into the town of Williston. If they develop it, that becomes tax revenue coming to the town of Williston. If you purchase it from the landowners, what's the value of that? Remember the folks they brought up was like $1 million, and I think the developers mentioned it's closer to like in between 10 and 20 million or something like that. That's a lot of money. Then you also have who's gonna maintain this property. Everybody likes looking at open property in Williston. See the beautiful fields, the farmers, you got the horse farm, everybody references that horse farm that was at Taft Corners. It was beautiful, the big red barn, you had the horses outside. It was just very attractive. You take open land that's not maintained, it turns into garbage. It's brush. It's nothing but buckthorn trees, brush. It's not even walkable at that point. So are we gonna have a Parks Department working for the town of Williston that's gonna be maintaining all this open property? Because open land doesn't stay open, and my family owns a fair amount of land in Williston. It's a full-time job taking care of it, brush hogging, maintaining the property. If you don't, it's worthless. You're not gonna be able to walk on it. So, what else I got here?
Running out of time.
Running out of time, all right, okay, that's good. Yes, I mean, so the other thing I didn't like about the new zoning regulation was it totally cuts out the select board, which is actually very important. And it also cuts out the input that the Williston residents can inject when these meetings happen. So the reality is, if you cut out the select board, you cut out the people and the residents of Williston from having their say, now you have just one department making all the decisions. The last thing I want to say is, people today, they say, hey, look at Williston, how bad it is right now. Well, it's because of the current zoning rules and regulations. Well, you know what that comes down to, people? It comes down to, yes, you got the zoning department, you got the select board, and if nobody says anything and nobody participates, this is what you get, okay? So it's important for people to come to town meetings, listen and vote and speak their opinion. Let people know what they think. It's very important.
Thank you.
All right, that's it. Thanks.
Anyone else in the back row over here?
You're a good talker. All right, so my name's Hannah Kessler, and I've lived in Williston for almost 3 years. So I guess maybe like other people, I get stressed out when I see the front page of the Williston Observer, and it's like, new development, new development. I'm like, oh my gosh, this feels a little bit out of control. But participating in some of the meetings and also reading through the entire form-based code, I was really encouraged, and I am ultimately in support of it. I think concentrating growth in a single area allows for like a future of a realistic like public transportation, walkable shopping, and like a real town center that feels like a destination and a place, which unfortunately, like I can't say about the center of Williston right now. It's something I go into when I need to go shopping, like, or pass through, and I think that's how a lot of people's experience with it. Something I do want to echo is that this comes with the promise of kinds of concentrating development in this center to preserve open space outside of it, and so I want to echo the concern of like this kind of spillover effect. This form-based code is concentrated in Taft's Corners, and so are there other protections towards kind of the areas around that we're thinking about? Additionally, I'm concerned about the ability of the infrastructure, both hard and soft, from like roads to schools, to support the growth plan. And I just want to touch briefly on the height of the buildings concern. I was walking around Burlington earlier today and noticing the buildings, specifically because I knew I was coming here. And 5 stories with an attic story, you see them sometimes in Burlington, but it seems a little out of proportion with the infrastructure and the green space that we're thinking about, especially considering that these were buildings that were built a long time ago with materials that aren't commonly used now, like they're architectural features, and I don't think our developers are really prioritizing that. I think the form-based code enforces features that will help with that, but they're just not, they're not the same like architectural beauty that they kind of were going to be. And so, and additionally, in the form-based code, I didn't see any renderings that included buildings of that height, and only I saw one like picture example that did, and so I just encourage maybe four stories seems more in scale, and that was what many of the renderings were. And so as this relates to kind of the affordable housing, like developers will not make it of their own free will. They'll be profitable of their own free will. And so I just echo the other speakers who encourage not giving in too much to some of the developers. I was listening to one of the town hearings, and it was a chance for the developers to respond to this form-based code. And one of them, their first question was, well, I have this plan already in process, can it be wavered in? And it just showed me where their priorities are and potentially not in line with the views and values of the people who actually live here. So to close, like ultimately, I'm in support of this form-based code. Reading the code makes me believe that the town is heading in a direction that makes it a place that like I'll want to stay. Like I live on 2A, like I hear the traffic every single day. But I think that the development is going to happen regardless. And the form-based code is an opportunity to steer that development in a way that's cohesive and that builds a town or perhaps like a city, if that's the scale. That's like a place that's proud of like being in, not like, oh yeah, I live in Williston, where all the stores are. And so with some tweaks, I think this form-based code can be the thing that gets us there. As someone said earlier, I want to visit my town and not just like shop there. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there a third row? I think just one person on the third. You want to speak? Yeah. Yes. Anyone else on the remote that wishes to speak?
Nope, no one's here.
Anyone in the room who hasn't spoken yet that would like to? If not, then the public hearing then essentially is done for tonight. We will not expect the select board to vote on anything tonight. We will have a good discussion following the closure of the public hearing tonight, which you're certainly welcome to attend. This is a public meeting, and so with that, I would look for a motion to close the public hearing.
Move we close the public hearing.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So we'll go on then to the development bylaw amendment discussion with the select board, and looking at the process that Matt has outlined for us, and where would you like to head for in the next couple of weeks before we meet again? And Eric, perhaps you'd like to start that out.
Sure. So the board's conducted a public hearing now, and now it's back to the board really to think about your process in reviewing this development bylaw proposal before you. Staff's provided some additional information in your packets, the memo from the planning director outlining some possible pathways to look at for changes with some items that have been raised previously. You also have a report from the town assessor, Bill Hinman, who took a look at the code and help address some of the questions the board had previously. You could also certainly help Bill join a meeting in person at some point too, if you have additional questions for him. I think for the board, you have, there's no time pressure here. You can, this is a big public policy discussion and ultimately next steps you'd like to take. So for the board as a body, decide kind of where the board would like to go next here, and staff is ready to support the board and how you'd like to structure the discussion moving forward.
So board, the thoughts you might have?
One of my concerns is that Jeff is not here.
Yeah.
I feel like Jeff has a lot of questions.
Yeah.
We can expect that he will be reviewing the tape.
He will, I'm sure. But it's a lot to process.
Yes.
I want to say one of the catalysts for wanting to warn the public hearing previously was because I knew that, and one of the things I love about our town is that we have a very passionate and engaged town, and I want to say thank you to all the folks in town who wrote who showed up online, and who showed up here in person today, regardless of, whether or not everybody agrees on all the points. This is what our community is about, and, really speaks to who we are as a town. So, yeah, I think, I support moving forward with this process. The form-based code, I think, gives us a catalyst to contribute positively to the change that is inevitable for our town, and to really build on the sense of community that we see here tonight. So,
It's a hot topic for sure. Thanks for everybody's input. I think one of the many themes that came out, but probably the number one is the building height. And maybe this is a question for you, Matt, is we call it an attic, other folks are calling it another story. I'm still looking for like more clarification on other options of what that may look like for someone that might not use it as a residential space, or if they do, if you could just speak a little bit more about that. I know we've kind of beat that ball around the room a little bit already, but I think it would be good for folks to hear again.
So thinking about what would happen in that topmost story of a pitched roof building, if you go into the building uses section, and if you give me a second, I'll give you the number. It's, building functions on section 7. Take a look at the use table. You'll see the allowed uses by story in the various designations on the regulating plan, and there are some on the table that have a P, which means they're permitted, things like residential and lodging, and in some zones there's an X, meaning not permitted. You see that for some of the other commercial uses like amusement and recreation, and some are restricted, like daycare, meaning there's some conditions that might be applied to that in that case. So, the first thing is there are some rules about what happens in those upper stories, although I don't know from the street whether you would really be able to perceive what was happening in those upper stories, and it shouldn't be driving the design of the building. The form standards should be driving the design of the building. But architecturally, what's happening is, regardless of the roof pitch that's used, and the code does allow a range of roof pitch, you're building some kind of dormers to house that space if you want to make it occupiable. And we have some standards for those dormers and the way they interact with the roof pitch to make sure that they are truly dormers and not sort of pretend dormers on a wall that's masquerading as a roof, which is sometimes what you get. Is I think when people get concerned that attic story is just going to be an extra story pretending to be a roof, there's some really strong standards in here that prevent that. So wherever the board might land on maximum height, if you allow that attic story, it makes it worth someone's while to build the pitched roof that's part of that uniquely Williston theme running through this code, while also making sure that what happens up there is a pleasant design that's harmonious with the building.
Okay, thanks.
Can I ask? I'm sorry.
I have one more.
Oh.
I don't know who brought it up earlier, but it doesn't matter. So the target of the focus of this form-based code is Taft Corner. That's the populated area that we want to consider. What about landowners that are beyond that district that potential developers might, be wanting to approach them because they're not getting what they want there? I'm sure the Planning Commission has probably talked about that. I just wondered if you share some of that conversation.
Sure. So, when you look outside the boundaries of the growth center, we have some districts that allow some commercial uses. Obviously, we have two very large districts that allow industrial uses. We do have still some sort of traditional retailing allowed at a smaller scale than Taft Corners up in the Gateway North along Route 2A towards the Essex line. Some travel services allowed under more conventional zoning around Exit 12. And portions of essentially what was once the big box zone, the Home Depot and Walmart zone on the other side of I-89. So there's opportunity for more traditional forms of retail commercial development outside of the borders, but in limited places. And on the residential side, really once you get out of the form-based code overlay zones, the residential form drops to the RZD, the residential zoning district, with a maximum density of 5 units per acre. Predominantly, what we used to see is entirely single-family home pattern. Now we see single-family along with duplex, triplex, even some 4s and 6s in some of the newly proposed developments in town. Much more of a 2-story pattern, even though we allow 36 feet of height in those other residential districts. We have yet to see it almost ever. And then, of course, you have your very small and highly regulated historic village, which is a mixed-use district as well, in which, if you saw the signs my staff put up through the village over the 4th, another area we're focusing some planning attention on very soon.
Thank you,
Does
Matt.
that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, for
Sort
now,
of.
for now.
Okay.
So, the building height, so now we look at, the maximum building height is 52 feet?
That's correct.
And that, I didn't understand the term, it includes, that goes to the roof from what?
Sidewalk.
From
Well,
the average finished grade. So we look at where the dirt hits the foundation, and we take the average spot where the dirt hits the foundation, and we measure up from there. So if you imagine a building on a slope, you go halfway down the slope and you measure from there. But sometimes what we see in that average finished grade is you've got your sidewalk down here, and then you've got kind of a mound covering part of the foundation, and then you're measuring from the top of the mound to the roof. So from the sidewalk, you may be looking at a 52-foot building, but it really, from the sidewalk level, is feeling more like a 58-foot building because of that grading. So now we're going to measure from the sidewalk under the form-based
And measuring from the sidewalk, the new maximum height is 64 feet.
In the most intense zones, the new maximum height, 64 feet, it's to that top plate.
Okay.
So it's where the 5th story ends.
Okay, and when we say, when people say sixth story, 6th floor, that's really only if you carve dormers into the roof. It doesn't add to the 64 feet.
Well, no, you do come up on top of the 64.
Okay.
Your roof pitch needs to start at that 64-foot height or sooner, and then you're allowed to put something in that roof area.
So if the pitch starts at 64 feet, what's the top of the roof?
Depending on how steep a roof and how deep a building, a very steep, very tall, pointy roof could add, 40 or 50 feet above that 64 if somebody really went nuts. But they're only going to be able to create occupiable space in that attic story, 64 plus 12 or so.
But is there anything in this code that would stop them from building a crazy roof that would make it so that from the sidewalk it's 100 feet tall?
Just the maximum 14-12 pitch. So it's you couldn't build a church steeple under this code, but there is not currently an absolute limit on height beyond the limit of the maximum height of the building plus the steepest pitch of roof that you could put on it.
And you said these would be in the most intense areas. Can you, without acronyms and colors and maps,
sure,
can you give me a description? Are we talking like behind Hannaford's? Are we talking on the other side of Walmart where there's an empty field? What are we talking about?
So around Maple Tree Place, around Hannaford's, and down into Taft Corners Park by Bed Bath & Beyond, etc. And in the portions of Blair Park that are closer to routes 2 and 2A, and coming around towards Finney Crossing, where Night and Day Lane and Zephyr Road begin to come in from Route 2A, but only for the first 50 or 60 feet, you have that taller building frontage. So along your major state highways and in your more intensely developed areas in the Taft Corners core, and then going down the hill towards Gardner Supply.
And then, reason I'm asking this question is going to be kind of obvious, I think, but the some of the sentiment on Front Porch Forum seemed to me anyway to imply that if we didn't pass this form-based code, that the land that's open now will stay open and nobody will be able to develop it. Is that accurate?
No.
What would be accurate?
What would be accurate is the lands within this overlay district are in one of 4 different current zoning districts, including the Taft Corners zoning district, which is the most intense district in town. It's where we do allow the 52-foot building height. We then flank that on one side with mixed-use commercial, the big box zone, and then on the other with mixed-use residential, essentially the Cottonwood Crossing zone. And up by the highway, we have a little bit of the gateway zone that pokes down towards this overlay district. And so in the predominance of this area, we just have a maximum 52-foot height, 3 to 4 story buildings allowed, vague intentions towards wanting pitched roofs, but an intention in the bylaw that's been extremely challenging to operationalize in actual decisions.
Oh, that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Just a few people had, touched on it, and certainly it's something, when formulating the energy committee and things like that we've talked about. But, you know, I think it would be helpful to just briefly provide an overview of what the thought is of how this will increase, you know, the incentive for affordable housing, and also for more environmentally friendly, you know, builds.
Sure. So on the affordability metric, the most basic principle here is that more dwelling units share in the high cost of land. So you can distribute the cost of the parcel the building is going on across more dwelling units, and there's just an economy of scale that happens when you do that. It makes a more efficient use of land and sets the stage for the potential creation of more affordable housing. As I've said several times, and as is reflected in the overarching issues section of the Taft Corners vision document, there is more work to do on affordable housing, and as I've mentioned recently, we are teed up in the Unified Program Work Plan with the CCRPC Regional Planning Commission to begin the work that would allow the town to consider requiring an affordable component in some new developments this fiscal year. So we're going to be kicking off some more work around affordability. On the efficiency side, you know, an environmental benefit, the energy efficiency gains that you get when dwelling units share, you know, their floor with the roof of another unit and their sidewalls with the sidewalls of another unit are really significant, on the order of more than doubling the efficiency of that unit as compared to building it as a single-family home. So thermal efficiency for heating and cooling really changes when units start to share walls and floors with one another. The other part is, of course, where and how you locate those units when you put them in a place that's walkable. Remember, about 20% of our trips happen because we're going from home to work. The other 80% are split fairly evenly between trips we make because we need to, like going to the grocery store, and trips we make because we want to, like going to see a friend. When you have a compact, walkable community, you still might have to jump in a car to go to work. Hopefully you can jump on a bus and go to work because we've created a community that's in a situation that can support real transit. But you're going to be able to walk to the grocery store in Taft Corners. It's one of the great things about Taft Corners is it's really easy to get to a grocery store. One of the most exciting things about working in Williston these last 14 years is, yes, there was a horse farm where Finney Crossing is now, and now there's Finney Crossing. And now on my way to the evening meetings I come to, I wait for people to cross Route 2 with grocery bags because they're walking back from Shaw's. They've made that trip without jumping in a car. That trip has become far less carbon intensive because they live near a grocery store. I saw people tonight under an umbrella at Felino's eating outside together. Maybe they all drove there, maybe they didn't, maybe they met up there because somebody lived at Finney. Again, the opportunity to shift what have traditionally always been obligated to be car trips into bike, walk, or bus trips is really leveraged when you create a compact, walkable community in a place like this.
So I think we're probably at the closing point for tonight on this discussion. Thank you all so much for coming. This is not a closed discussion at this point. If you have more input for Select Board, please feel free to email to Eric. He will get all of the information to us. And if you have questions that come up, send those to Eric as well, and he will forward that to Matt and the planning staff. So thank you very much, and we're almost at the end of our meeting.
Thank you.
Is there any other business to bring forward tonight?
That was enough.
Going. Then we are adjourned.